So, thank you all for coming tonight, and it's wonderful to be back here at Ocean of Compassion. I think I was here last July, and always enjoy my visits here, and thank you all for being a part of this center. So tonight's topic is what's merit got to do with it, or positive potential, this term that we use a lot in Tibetan Buddhism in particular, and just kind of do a little exploration of that together tonight. So as usual, I like to start with just a short meditation, give ourselves a chance to come into this space, to focus our minds a bit, and then also to set a good intention. And I may even interject a few questions that you can begin to already mull over in terms of this topic tonight. But find a good meditation posture. Make sure that the back is straight, kind of have this nice uprightness to the body. But then it's also important to relax into this posture as much as you can, letting go of any tension that you feel that might be an obstacle to your meditation. And then when you're ready, you can begin to tend to the breath. So we use breathing meditation usually just to focus our minds, give ourselves a chance to let go of whatever distractions might be there. And if you have a technique that you already use in relation to the breath, then you can do that. And if not, then I'll just suggest this point at the tip of the nose that can be a good meditation object to focus upon. When we breathe in and out through the nostrils, there's that very subtle sensation that occurs just inside the tip of the nose, or sometimes people feel it on the upper lip. But just tune into that sensation as you breathe in, as you breathe out. Try to stay present with it, not allowing the mind to wander, but not doing this in a really tight way. Just gently maintaining your focus on the breath. But no doubt the mind will wander, and suddenly we'll find ourselves thinking about things that happened earlier today or earlier this week, or maybe plans that we're making for the future. No doubt there will be many things that pull the mind away from the breath. And when we see that that's happened, then we gently let that go and return to the breath. So I'm going to ring the bowl here, and we'll do this in silence for just a few minutes, and then I'll lead you in this short reflection and setting a motivation. So now with our minds a bit more focused, I'm just going to invite you to explore your own understanding of merit. When we use this word, hear this word, how do you think of that? And just, again, there's no right answer to this question. We all have different impressions, perhaps even thoughts that come from previous ways that we've engaged in spiritual practice, perhaps in other traditions. But if you were to describe merit to someone else, what are the sorts of terms that you would use? How is it that you think of this concept? And just spend a minute or two exploring that. And then I'd also like to invite you, as you think about this topic, to think about the ways that you create merit in your day. And just to acknowledge those. Might not need to share those with anyone else, but just to have your own understanding of the ways in which you think that you're currently creating merit. And then on the basis of that, one thing we'll talk about tonight is this practice of rejoicing, of feeling this great joy in your heart that you do create this positive potential, this merit. And just spend a moment doing that, just to start our evening tonight with this very joyous feeling, this mind of rejoicing that is thinking about your own qualities, your own activities, the things that you do that are positive. And let that joy generate deeply in your heart. And then to set our intention, our motivation, to think that you're here to explore this topic of merit for your own benefit initially, understanding that yes, you will experience greater happiness and well-being when you're able to operate with an even greater understanding of how to work with merit, how to increase our positive potential, how to make sure that it's not destroyed. But also to extend this to others, because the reason why we need merit, the reason why we're engaging in the practice of accumulating merit, is so that we can be of greatest benefit to others, so that we can achieve Buddhahood. And this is that mind of Bodhichitta, the mind that aspires to attain that ultimate goal, so that we can then lead every single being to achieving that same state. We can help them to accumulate merit, to purify their negativities, to become fully enlightened. And think that it's for this reason that you're here tonight, as your greater motivation, your deeper motivation. You yourself will certainly benefit from what we talk about, but think that you're mainly doing that so that you can be of benefit to others. Interesting bowl. Okay, so I'm curious what people, if you're willing to share, what sorts of thoughts you had about how you would think about merit, or how you normally, what your concepts are about this term. I assume everybody in the room has heard this term. Is that true? Yeah, okay. You're here maybe because you want me to give the answer. So I'll give some answers. But I'm curious what people think about this. Because I know I certainly was influenced when I first came across it by prior thinking, ways that I'd been raised in the Catholic Church and what have you. But anyone want to share anything?
About what we think merit is?
Yeah, what do you think merit is? What, if you had to describe it to somebody, what words would you use? Or how would you talk about it?
Creating good habits in your mind.
Okay, Casey, thank you. Creating good habits in your mind. Yeah, David.
I just wanted to thank you for the really beautiful introduction to the topic that you just gave. I think I'm going to parrot something that you've already said about creating positive potential. Mm-hmm. There's something about that, I think, that that helps us to create the potential for growth and the potential for evolution toward Buddhahood.
Okay.
Something like that.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you for elaborating on that. That's great. Thanks, David. Anyone else? Yes, what's your name again? I've met you before. Marge, that's right. Yes, good to see you again, Marge.
For me, it's just making sure that I'm doing things for other people and not putting myself first.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
Not doing any harm, trying not to do any harm.
And if you can benefit, as His Holiness often says, this is kind of how we should, go about our lives, is try not to harm, or try to help, and if we can't help, at least do no harm. Wonderful. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Marge. Anyone else? Yeah, Judy?
So mine's similar to Marge's, until I started hearing about merit. I mean, when you're growing up, your parents always tell you to think of others first. I seem to have forgotten that for a long time until I started hearing about the merit.
Yeah.
It does make you think more about doing things for others.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, I think there's definitely in the Mahayana tradition this perspective that when we speak of merit, we're mostly talking about those actions, again, that certainly do no harm to others, but can even benefit others through our bodhicitta motivation. But we'll get into this a bit more as well. I mean, if I were to, was anything else anyone wanted to share in their own reflection? So, okay. So if we kind of go to the traditional text and talk about, what is really meant by merit, it's very hard to distinguish the term merit from what we normally call just virtuous karma or wholesome karma. At some level, we can say that it's meritorious. We need meritorious actions in order to experience any happiness, whether it be the happiness that we experience in our ordinary lives in terms of the things that we have, the things we enjoy, or whether we talk about all the way to the happiness of enlightenment and being able to bring others to enlightenment. So this term is used rather loosely in the traditional texts, and we can even speak about merit that's required for just liberation versus merit that's required for enlightenment. But it seems to be a pretty key concept that, again, we shouldn't get too... I guess one of the problems we always have with these sorts of concepts, karma is a very complicated topic, as all of us in the room know, is that it's very hard to, because we're not talking about something that is kind of substantial. You don't get a merit statement at the end of every month from some entity that says, this is your balance of merit. You did all these great things. Every day you did a deposit, in terms of what you accumulated, but you did take some withdrawals, So this is your balance, and you're either in the red or you're in the black or wherever, So we don't have any ways of talking about it in those terms because it's a bit nebulous. We're talking about something that, even at the level of just this word karma that we use, that's very hard to define when it comes to what we're really speaking about. I frequently just use the term energy, potential is a good one. Positive energy or positive potential, when we talk about merit, of course the demeritorious actions or non-virtuous actions are the opposite of that, kind of taking away from all of that. So we have these, when we get into the topic of karma, it's very hard to define what that force is that's working all the time, that is shaping our experience, that we are creating for future experience. So it becomes, very, very difficult to pin it down. So when I came to teachings, and initially from a Catholic tradition, I hadn't really practiced Catholicism to the degree that I practiced Buddhism. I grew up with it, but I left it at a fairly early age. But I think I got into a lot of this kind of almost feeling like merit was sort of doled out as opposed to something that I created, and so like it's really a personal thing in terms of the merit that each of us possesses or that we use is like our own little storehouse. It's our own little thing that comes with us, that there's always some merit there that will play some role in creating some continuity of our positive experiences. But we obviously, and according to this path, we really have to tend to this, and we have to be personally responsible for accumulating it. It doesn't come from outside of ourselves, but nonetheless, we can say that there are many things outside of ourselves that we're going to talk about tonight that have a very strong bearing on the extent to which we can accumulate merit and the extent of merit that we accumulate. So this is the context for what we're really going to be looking at tonight, is kind of that dynamic. So I want to talk a little bit about karma and maybe discuss karma a bit, because even though I'm guessing that everybody's here has had some teachings on karma, I think it's worthwhile to always go back to reminding ourselves of some of the very basic principles of karma. Because if we are equating merit or positive potential with essentially virtuous karma, then we are talking about the same sort of principles. It's just we do tend to, in this tradition, do an awful lot of emphasis on non-virtuous karma. We want to make sure we pay attention to that. We want to make sure that we purify all of that. We want to make sure we don't create any of that. But Lama Zopa Rinpoche, our spiritual director, very much emphasizes accumulating merit and making sure that we're doing what we can to keep that positive side of it going. Frequently, these are even the two main tasks that we talk about, right? To purify negativities and negative actions and to accumulate merit, which are kind of like, I frequently use the example of a bed of soil for our minds. We know that in a bed of soil you can get a beautiful garden to grow, right? You can have the most amazing flowers and all sorts of delicious, delightful things. But you can also let it be completely overrun by weeds, So the potential in our minds is to do either one of those things. But if we want to have a really good garden, then we have to do two activities. One is we have to remove everything that kind of weakens the strength of that soil, that obstructs it, the rocks and the weeds or anything else that kind of is not going to allow the garden to really grow. But then we also have to accumulate the merit, which is like putting the nutrients into the soil and making sure that it has everything that will sustain growth all the way to the culmination of that garden. So in essence, we're talking about this type of principle. How do we tend to our minds in that way so that we don't get hung up and stuck by all the various things that can cause a block in that energy and not allow us to move forward in creating what we're trying to create? And then how do we strengthen what will move us forward and keep all of that process going? So the principles of karma are very much applicable here, because it's the same thing we talk about in terms of negative karma, just applied in terms of the positive. So just to remind ourselves in terms of karma being essentially something created by our mind. It's not to say, again, that physical actions or verbal actions don't count. They definitely count, but they count as they are accompanied by our minds, and particularly by very wholesome states of mind. So a lot of what we do in terms of accumulating karma can involve our bodies and can involve various actions we do, as we'll be discussing tonight, or even saying things, reciting things, and so on. But nonetheless, it all really starts with our minds. Karma is a mental event in terms of, specifically, the term karma is referring to action. And by that we are primarily talking about mental action, mental movement. So I want to just reiterate what are called the four general characteristics of karma, of this, principle of action that is operating all the time in terms of the thoughts that we have, the seeds that we're planting, and so on. So does anyone remember any of these 4 general characteristics of karma? It's quiz time.
You have to have the intention, then there has to be the action.
Oh, this is okay. This is another list that, what you're saying, Casey, is a good one to remember as well, which is kind of the 4 components of a full or complete action. And those were, again, intention. Well, actually, the basis is the first one usually presented. Then the intention, or state of mind, is how I like to refer to that one, which includes a number of components. And then the action itself, and then the completion or the conclusion. These are kind of taught prior to that generally. And these are, again, they're usually called like the 4 general characteristics of karma. I'll give you the first one, and then you can maybe take off from there. That the first one is that karma is certain or definite. Anyone just ringing a bell? Okay, I'll go through all 4 of them. Well, let's start with number 1, and then maybe the other ones will come back. So when we say karma is certain or definite, what we mean is that there's a certitude in terms of the type of seed that we plant, in terms of the action that we engage in, and the result that we get from it. Just like if you plant an apple seed, you don't get an avocado tree, right? It would be a maze. If you just put an apple seed in the ground and suddenly an avocado tree grew up, you'd be like, where did that come from? Because there's quite a difference between an avocado seed and an apple seed, right? You didn't mix them up, So this is showing that there's something certain in terms of the type of seed that we plant brings forth its corresponding result. So this allows us to have the conviction in the context of merit, positive potential, that everything that we do that is meritorious will have its positive result, will have a fruition in terms of the good results that we get from it. Of course, on the other side was, all the stuff we want to avoid, all those negative actions that bring forth suffering results, or what we would call, unpleasant, painful results, things that are in line with that. So this first principle of karma helps us to understand that we can have great conviction in what we're doing in accumulating merit, because without a doubt, every seed that we plant that is positive is certain to bring forth a result of happiness, a result of potentially temporal happiness. But of course, as we're going to talk about tonight, if we unite it with bodhicitta motivation and dedicate it, then we're also dedicating for more ultimate happiness, the happiness of enlightenment. And of course, all of what that entails in terms of our ability to bring happiness to others and so on. So that's the first of the 4. Does anybody remember the second of the 4? Okay. The second is that karma increases or multiplies. It doesn't stay the same. This is why frequently when we talk about karma in Western culture, we think there's a linearity to it. This is how it's at least interpreted in the general population. If you've had Buddhist teachings, then you don't think of it solely this way. But people often say, when somebody does something really negative, they'll get theirs, meaning like if they said something really mean and spiteful to somebody, well, then somebody's going to say something really mean and spiteful to them. Well, that makes it seem like you planted a seed for just that type of action to ripen in just that type of result. But that's not how karma works. Karma is very complex because of this increasing potential. It multiplies. It becomes larger and larger. It's in the same way, not similar, but in the same way that apple seed that you plant in the ground doesn't bring forth something that's just another apple seed. It brings forth an entire apple tree and bushels of apples year after year. Of course, provided that all these other conditions are there. But karma increases so far beyond that, they say, that we can't see it replicated in the natural world. Karma every day, this is why Lama Zopa says we're insane not to purify, because those negative actions are doing this as well as our positive actions. But they increase. By the second day, they're twice as strong. By the next day, they're 4 times as strong. By the next day, they're 8 times. Just keeps going incrementally, karma increasing into outrageous results. Now, applying it to merit, of course, this is why merit works. To get us to enlightenment is because we can do these individual actions that seem in and of themselves perhaps a bit insignificant, but each one of them has the potential to grow into outrageous results in terms of when especially we're dedicating them for something like enlightenment, because this principle of karma is operative with every one of our actions. everything we do, every seed we plant on our mental continuum, every thought we have, every word we say, every physical action we engage in, brings about that process of like amassing a larger and larger quantity over time. The third and the fourth, are kind of corollaries. I think of them as corollaries because they speak to kind of this idea of whether something ripens into a result or not. The third one is you cannot possibly get a result for which you didn't create the cause. So no results come without their cause is essentially what that's saying. Of course, part of that is implying that any result we get comes from a cause. We have to have the cause to get the result. Now, again, in terms of the apple seed analogy, we know that this is true. You don't sit there with just like a big plot of land somewhere out where, everybody else has got apple trees and you just kind of wait for the apple trees to come up and you're not doing anything. You never plant the seeds, you never water it, you never do anything. We again know in the physical world that we don't get those kinds of results without creating the cause. Well, it's the same in terms of karma, in terms of our spiritual path. If we want to achieve a result, we have to create the causes. There are no results without their causes being created. So in terms of merit, this obviously applies greatly because if we are, as Buddhist practitioners in this Mahayana tradition, trying to achieve enlightenment, we know that we have to create the causes for that. And this is why this term merit, I mentioned earlier, we could equate it with virtuous karma, but the term is frequently used in the context of that positive force that we're trying to propel us into that state of enlightenment, kind of putting all the gas in the tank so we can make the journey all the way to enlightenment. So in that context, we see that this third principle is absolutely essential. The fourth one is the idea that actions that we have done, causes we have created, are never wasted. There's no kind of disappearing of them on their own. Now, in terms of the negative ones, we know we can make those disappear in terms of the force of them by purification. That's not the topic of tonight, purification. We could look at that at another time, but this is that process of removing those seeds from our mental continuum, or at least weakening them so that they don't interfere with our well-being and our attainment of results. In terms of the meritorious ones, we have to make sure that we don't create a negative force that counteracts them as well. And this is an important part of tonight as well, is to give us that kind of cautionary thing that while we can create an awful lot of merit by putting our minds to it, by understanding the mechanism by which merit is created, we can also destroy our merit. We also can greatly damage our merit so that it doesn't bring about the results that we intend it to. So, the actions we do will not be wasted, but there's a little footnote to that one, unless they meet with counteracting forces, unless they meet with something that's going to weaken or completely, eliminate them. So we do see that there's all four of these principles of karma are absolutely important in terms of our understanding of meritorious actions and how we create that storehouse of positive energy that will get us to the end. We can be certain that if we continue doing virtuous things, it will bring about a result of happiness. We know that it will increase over time. Just as the negative things increase, the positive things increase. So also this means we have to pay attention to even the smallest ways that we create merit. Even just the most minute actions and thoughts that we can have that will be a useful tool to help us on that process. We also know that we have to be intent upon creating that if we want the result, and we know that if we do create it, we will get the result. Have that confidence that this will play out in terms of, it may not look like it in the moment. It's not like you create a whole bunch of merit one day and then the next day you're a Buddha. You look in the mirror and go, wow, I'm enlightened. That's not how it works. We all know it takes much more than that. This is a part of our process, but this isn't the whole of our spiritual path. But we can have confidence that this side of it will work, because these principles are operative all the time. Because this is how karma operates and works. Any questions or comments on that? Yeah, David.
Just wanted to add the factor of time into it because, as you said, nothing's wasted. But sooner or later, we will reap the benefits or the liabilities But that sooner or later may be very soon, or it may be way later.
Yeah.
And so I think our view has to be quite large.
Right. Exactly.
Otherwise, it doesn't make sense, really.
Yeah. No, this is something His Holiness the Dalai Lama talks about frequently, is that we need to make sure we maintain that long-term view. I'll talk about this even a little bit this weekend in this course on the eight pillars of joy. The first one is perspective, and perspective is one of the key perspectives, is to not be so caught up in just the immediate effects right now. Like I said, to get frustrated because we're not seeing this all ripen in our lifetimes or something. To have that faith that things do take time and that we have to be willing to invest in a much longer process. I think in our conditioned lives, we think that, it's going to turn around immediately or it's not going to happen at all. And that's just the wrong perspective here. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's really an important part of it. Because we are talking about a process that, again, because it's so hard to kind of get our heads around what we mean by merit, it's hard to talk in these terms. But we can certainly say that we need to have an incredible amount of merit in order to overcome what has happened in the past. If we think about it from the perspective of we've been in samsara, this is again according to the Buddha's teachings, if we look at the nature of mind, we see that our minds have always arisen from a prior moment of mind, meaning that there is no beginning to mind. That what we think of as the mind of this life wasn't the initial moment of mind. It didn't start in the womb or at conception. It was a mind that came from a previous life, from the intermediate state, from a life before that, and so on. We never see a beginning to mind. So we've created incredible amounts of negative actions. Hopefully we've created lots of positive actions. I mean, we certainly wouldn't be here sitting in human form listening to these teachings if we hadn't created a lot of positive potential already. But we've created an awful lot of other stuff, that needs to be overcome. So we need a really large force to overcome this. And that's part of why I present on this topic frequently, is because I think we need to see that we can do that. And our lamas, our guides, are giving us these incredible opportunities to accumulate amazing amounts of merit that will be the force that can help us to overcome all of the kind of energy of the negative side of it, the side of it that we have also cultivated in countless lifetimes, that is all there and has the same principle of multiplying and increasing, and that can ripen in and of itself into some pretty horrific results for us. We like to think that, because we're here in this human life, that we're sort of guaranteed that we're going to stay in some sort of favorable state, but there's no guarantees on that. So it's pretty nebulous. Like I said, you don't get your statement every month about where you are in your accumulation of merit versus your negative karma or what have you. But I think it's important for us just to acknowledge that we have a pretty amazing task to overcome. But the methods are there to do that. Again, through the kindness of these great beings, the Buddha himself, as well as all of our teachers, they've been able to access many different ways to help us to create incredible positive potential. So we shouldn't get discouraged at all, and we should be invested in the long term. Understand that, sometimes I like to think about this idea of lifetimes. It's like I used to run the relay race in track and field when I was in high school. It's like a relay race in a center, but you're passing the baton to your next life, And so it's like, what was important about being on a relay team is that you wanted to use the space that you had, the quarter mile or whatever, to get as far ahead as possible so that when you pass the baton to the next person, they could be in the best position to continue that process of winning the race. Well, I don't like to make it sound like a competition. It's not a competition. But nonetheless, we have to have kind of a good position when we end this life. When we get to the end of this life, if we haven't achieved enlightenment, which we can do through the techniques that are taught in Tantra, if we haven't done that, then we at least are assured that we're passing the baton to our next life, and we're going to be in a good position to not have all of this negative karma overtake us, to not have all of that, keep us back on this race to enlightenment. Instead, we'll make sure that we are in a good position to get even further in our next lifetime. So this is the responsibility we have. We're carrying the baton this life, And this merit can be made in incredibly powerful ways if we just pay attention to what we're doing. So those 4 general characteristics of karma are important to remember in terms of what we're doing here. That this is according to the way that this is set out, which, again, we might need to have some conviction in karma. I do get from the years I've been teaching that karma is not an easy principle for people to sign up to. It's not something that I can prove to you. It's not something you can prove to yourself. Now, you can have some awareness of it through deeper investigation. You can come to have great conviction in it as something that is, Venerable Rabina frequently uses the term like a working hypothesis. You can say, okay, this is how I'm going to live my life, is with this principle. It's a very empowering principle. I was talking earlier about how I came from the Catholic tradition, where I never got good answers to these sorts of questions from our pastor, and that when I would say, well, why are people born in, South in Africa and parts of the world where, they don't have any resources, they don't have what they need, they never even meet with the Catholic tradition, and you're telling me that you have to go through that to become saved and to go to heaven and be with God, but I have all of that opportunity. Those people don't have that opportunity, but I have all that opportunity. And they would just go, oh, it's a mystery, only God knows. And so Buddhism explains it all by karma. We are all in different positions because we all have different karma. And it's not to make it cold and discompassionate. It's actually to understand that we all can transform our situations. Everyone can transform their situation. In this lifetime, it can become quite difficult for some beings to transform their situation. But we all have that potential. It's the instrument and the understanding that we can bring to applying that in our lives and making sure that we have the results that we seek. So it's very empowering. It's not like this force that's overtaking us in any way. It's a force that we have ourselves through our own minds, through possessing mind and being able to work with our minds to create more positive patterns. So the one thing that I do want to point out before we go into this a little bit more too is this idea that, when we talk about merit, though Rinpoche, I'll give his take on it later, but when we talk about merit, we're frequently talking about kind of that wing of the bird. Frequently we use this idea of 2 wings of a bird. The one wing of the bird that is this kind of compassionate method that is influenced by all of the good things we do, the positive karma that we create, that helps us to get to the destination that we're seeking, helps us to get to enlightenment. But we know that we can't get there on one wing alone. We need the other wing, the wing of wisdom. And so we often talk about these as if they're 2 distinct things. But just like the wings of a bird, they work in tandem. That we need to have a good attention to this compassion side of it as a means of helping to strengthen our ability to penetrate more deeply in terms of wisdom. And we need to cultivate the wisdom that will help underpin and strengthen the compassion, because we gain greater and greater compassion the deeper our knowledge is. So not to see these as 2 absolute divided things that are unrelated, but that work in tandem. I was even taken, not by surprise, but I was really quite impressed with what Rinpoche shared, Lama Zopa, in the Light of the Path last year in North Carolina, which if you ever get a chance to go, I really encourage you to go, at least even for a week. It's an amazing retreat with Rinpoche. Next year, I think it's in May 5th through 30th, something like that. At that retreat, he talked about how, even if we talk about something like calm abiding, this state of meditation that many of you are familiar with, where continuing to do that type of practice like we did at the beginning tonight, focusing on a single object, focusing on the breath. By continuing to do that, you eventually develop this state that's called shamatha, or calm abiding. My friend Glenn Svensson just led a retreat on this down at Vajrapani down the way. So anyway, this is an important practice for us. But Rinpoche emphasized, he says, there are many people who think, oh, I just need to go get that. I'm going to just go, into retreat and get that. But they don't accumulate the merit that allows you to get that. So he says many people fail in getting good meditative practice because they haven't attended to the merit side of it. And they sometimes include developing meditative stabilization as part of our wisdom wing, that we really need that because that's how we will be able to discern reality much more deeply, through these wisdom teachings. So we understand that there is a dynamic between these 2 that we really rely upon. If we want to gain realizations of the path, if we want to actually change our minds in these irreversible ways, get to that point where we have these realizations very firmly in our minds and transform our being. We need merit. We need that positive potential. As Rinpoche said, you can't get it without the requisite amount of merit. Now again, what's the requisite amount? How do we know how much we even have? There's no statement. So we just keep putting energy into that. Lama Tsongkhapa himself, the founder of this tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, the Gelugpa, he was told by his guru, who was appearing to him in the form of Manjushri, that in order for him to realize emptiness, he had to engage in more meritorious practices. He had to do all these mandala offerings, as well as the purification, doing countless prostrations to the 35 Buddhas, all these things. They say there's a rock in Tibet where he would do his mandala offerings, and of course he must have scraped himself silly, initially getting this rock all smooth. They say the rock is incredibly smooth. This is something I may touch on a little later. One of the practices that we're encouraged to do to accumulate great merit is making mandala offerings, making vast offerings. So even if somebody like Lama Tsongkhapa, who's an incredible scholar, some of you have read some of the texts that he's written, the Lamrim Chenmo being one of the most amazing treatises on this path, you can see that even somebody like that who had incredible acuity, incredible sharpness, his wisdom wing was like highly developed, but he needed the merit. He needed this attending to that side of it to kind of help make the journey. So we see that this is a very important part of our path, that if we neglect, we're not going to get the results that we want, unfortunately. Once more, go back to that. Results cannot be achieved without the causes being there. If we haven't created the causes, we don't achieve the results. So merit is absolutely essential in the Mahayana path in particular. Now, in the traditional teachings, they say that in order to accomplish Buddhahood, you need something like 3 great countless eons worth of merit, which sounds, again, beyond our understanding, beyond our ability to get our heads around. I'm not trying to discourage you by saying that. I'm just, again, putting that out there that we are talking about a pretty vast amount of this positive potential that needs to be there. But there's techniques to develop it at that level. There's some amazing gifts that we've been given through the kindness, the compassion of the Buddha, as well as our teachers, to be able to do that. So any questions or comments on that in terms of introducing kind of what we're talking about here? I know it still seems very vague at some level. I don't think I can answer that question in a really precise way, other than saying, again, that if we're saying merit is equivalent to virtuous karma, then it is this sort of force through the power of our own minds that we are able to benefit from by virtue of continuing to engage in those actions that strengthen that power. And especially, once more, as we talk about when we dedicate that, when we seal that for a particular result, the result of enlightenment, that we are able to amass that amount of merit. Yes, Casey?
So, what happens if you do good actions, but you don't do the dedication? You forget to do that part of it.
If you don't do the dedication, well, you won't receive the result of enlightenment from those actions, because your actions were not it's tricky, because if I motivated, like say we did a motivation before we sat down and did some mantra recitation or some practice or water bowls or whatever, some meritorious practice. If we motivated and said, I want to become a Buddha for the sake of others, this is what I'm, my strong motivation to do this action, but then at the end we don't dedicate. I would say that probably you still could have that result from those actions because you had that strong motivation. Why we dedicate, they say, is to make it kind of inexhaustible, to kind of make sure that it continues to bring forth this result that stays in line with enlightenment all the way through, all beings becoming enlightened. It kind of keeps it in that track, moving towards enlightenment. It still could bring forth enlightenment, but it's not going to be as secure, if you will. The dedication is a way of stabilizing it, securing it, kind of putting it in the bank so that we make sure that it becomes inexhaustible and brings forth that result. Now, if you didn't motivate in the first place, you're just...
Say that.
Yeah.
Today I saved an ant. I mean, it was on the kitchen counter, so I took it, put
Good.
it in a container, and took
Good.
it outside. I didn't even think to motivate, nothing.
Right.
I did dedicate, but I did forget to motivate.
And if you dedicated, then these are the sorts of questions that I would ask our pastor in Catholic Church. It would drive him crazy. I think that's my karma ripening, because I would ask those kinds of questions. Well, what if you did this, but then you changed your mind? He'd like go, oh God, that's a tough one, because if you dedicated without motivating, I think at some level, we can say, this is one reason why I think Rinpoche encourages us to, at the beginning of our day, motivate, is because frequently we don't always have the motivation, but maybe we remember at the end to dedicate. I'd say there's a lot of factors that could still allow it to be dedicated for enlightenment in that way. But that's why it's important to remember as much as we can, that thought. And again, we see the ant there and we go, oh, there's a suffering sentient being. I need to be and become a Buddha for the sake of that being. And then you scoop it up and then you put it outside and you dedicate your act of protecting life in that way for the benefit of all beings. And so it's nice if we can have all of it complete. But if you have somebody who didn't do either, they don't know about bodhicitta perhaps, or they're just not so mindful of bodhicitta, and they don't dedicate because they don't have that practice or just forgot to, then I would say that you did a virtuous thing. You have some merit, but it's not the merit that becomes an accumulation of merit for enlightenment, because it never had that thought accompanying it. So you would get the benefit, for example, if it was an ordinary person with no Buddhist background or belief, they save the life of that animal and they get the virtue of protecting life and not killing. That ripens into mundane results for them. It ripens into them having a good rebirth or having a long life and no illness, these kinds of things. So it's always going to have a positive fruition because it's still following that law of karma in terms of these 4 principles. But in terms of the goal that we're seeking of enlightenment, it's not going to be related to that to some degree. It can be a factor that helps one to have good circumstances in their life, perhaps meet with the Buddha's teachings, perhaps whatever, But it won't bring forth enlightenment because the thought was never there to do the action with that intention, and there's also not the concluding thought of dedicating it for that result. So that's why it's important to have those sorts of mindfulness with what we're doing, or at least as Rinpoche says, start your day with bodhicitta so it becomes what he calls the causal motivation. It's the motivation that you put behind all of your actions, and you can even hold that thought at the beginning of the day. May everything I do with my body, speech, and mind, become the cause for others to achieve enlightenment, and have that strong intention. Then hopefully at the end of our day, we can look back and remember as well to dedicate everything we did that day for that result. But it becomes second nature once we adopt it as a practice. Judy.
It's related to what you just said, but so if you're not at the super mindful level yet, and you just do it at the very beginning and at the very end of the day, does that count?
I wouldn't see why not. They encourage you to dedicate as soon as possible after the action, but that's because the power of our actions can be offset by these unfortunate states of mind. It's like we've just put a whole bunch of jewels into our house, but we've left the door open so the thief can come in and take them away really easily. Until we kind of secure them and lock them up, they can't be stolen, or they can be stolen. And once they are locked up, they can't be stolen. So that's why I think they frequently say, make sure we dedicate our merits as soon as possible, because if we don't, things like anger, which is the worst one, can deplete our merits and destroy our merits. I was going to talk about these later, but might as well go into them. Any strong negative emotion can be a force behind that, but the ones that are generally pointed out are anger and wrong views. And most of us hopefully don't hold really strong wrong views. Wrong views are when we are holding something quite intently that we know is in opposition to what the Buddha taught. Holding that karma doesn't exist, holding that enlightenment doesn't exist, those kinds of strong, wrong views. So hopefully we're not doing that. But it's really easy to get angry, right? You know, you do this wonderful thing and then somebody, you know, says something or does something and you get really angry, and it's like you've just burnt up all that stuff that you just put so much attention into creating. Now, if you dedicate, there's no guarantee that you're going to keep it from being in any way wiped out. I think that that's a bit of a mistaken idea, that somehow we are assuring that it's not going to be harmed in any way. But the chances of it being dedicated towards enlightenment will definitely be there still, even if it gets weakened to some degree. That's why making sure that we dedicate is really important, to make sure that we do what we can to keep that force going forward to a greater goal, not to the goal of just sort of temporal happiness and well-being. So I think that's why it's emphasized. But if you have a relatively calm day and you engaged in a lot of virtue and you had a positive intention at the beginning and you maybe tried to think about bodhicitta during the day, but then at the end of the day you at least remembered to dedicate, I don't think there's any problem. You haven't weakened any of that karma. It was still created. It was still there. Are just simply now making sure that it gets stored and brings forth that result, that it becomes inexhaustible. I think there's differing views on this too. I saw one time where somebody said, yeah, that even doing that, even dedicating, doesn't protect it from anger or wrong view. But I think at some level, I think that would be kind of sad, because that means that, you know, then all of that we are sort of securing and putting aside isn't going to necessarily bring forth the result that we want. And that's why we do that. That's why we dedicate, is because we are intent upon achieving that. So I don't know. I have read differing things on that as to what that really does. Dedicating in the strongest way we can say, or in the most definite way we can say, it is to help bring forth the result and make sure that it becomes inexhaustible. That, you know, that force of that merit produces this result. That is kind of an interesting result. I mean, the result of Buddhahood is one where you will be continuing to help sentient beings perpetually. You become like this almost self-generating kind of thing, but it's through the force of your prior merit that you dedicated for that result that you attain that and are able to continue to turn the wheel of Dharma for beings, continue to be a benefit to them, appear in whatever way is needed for them, all of that on the basis of that merit that you accumulated. So it seems like, again, we can say that's a definiteness to it, but does it protect it from being destroyed? I would hope to some degree, yes, based on the teachings that I've had. But nonetheless, it does seem like some people say there's no sort of guarantee with that. We don't dedicate just for that. We dedicate mainly so that it produces this inexhaustible result of Buddhahood.
I think it can be quite demoralizing to think, boy, that all that work you did, you know, could just get wiped out in one, as Shantideva says, right? One act of anger and you can wipe out all your merit.
Yeah.
But then I can see the other side of that argument too, because if you think, you know, your bank and vault is so secure with all the merit you've stored, then you could become complacent and mindless.
Yeah. I agree, and we do see the force of our negative states of mind, in particular anger. I mean, especially when anger moves into thought, out of thought into speech and action. As thought, it's bad enough because it's really a pretty turbulent force, very powerful force. But when we see it kind of operating in our world at large and what can come out of it, we do see that we have to be vigilant in counteracting those negative states. So I agree, it's kind of giving us that encouragement to say, don't become complacent, don't like sit and rest on your laurels and think, well, I've accumulated all this merit, I can get angry every now and then, you know. What's the problem? You know, so I think we have to be very disciplined in regard to both sides of it. You know, not just think that because I'm tending to this really well, then I can let go of that. It's accumulate positivity and merit and decrease and eliminate negativity. That's our spiritual path. That's the essence of our spiritual path, you know, of what the Buddha taught. That's what we mean by spiritual practice. So if you're saying, you know, yeah, I'm going to just keep doing all these wonderful things and I'm going to keep doing all the bad things and think that somehow that's not going to matter, I think it does matter. You know, it weakens the force of all of these good actions that we're doing. And again, don't be so really hard on ourselves in this process. We're trying to change something that has been formed for countless eons. It's gone on back without any beginning. All these patterns in our mind are there because of the force of all of that. Because remember, that's one of our karmic results, is that we have the tendency to do the same thing that we've done. That's the result similar to the cause in terms of our behavior. Yeah, Judy?
There's so many negative afflictions. Do you know why anger is one of the ones that, I mean, I can see wrong with you being like a super important one, but there's so many other ones also. Do you know why anger is such an important, not good thing?
Yeah, why is anger singled out as maybe being... I think we can see that, as I was mentioning, that its destructive force is so great in our world, that whereas something like jealousy or pride or greediness, I mean, certainly greediness can be also pretty damaging in our world, the extent to which people are miserly and hold on to things and don't share their resources, their knowledge, whatever, with others. But I think that we can see that, beings lose their lives, lose so many things that bring them pleasure and well-being by the force of anger, and their minds are so disturbed when they are treated in that way, that we are not just frequently messing with their physical well-being, we're messing with their mental well-being. I mean, think of how we feel when somebody gets angry at us, right? It's not a pleasant experience to have somebody assaulting you with all of that. And we know that our assaulting others is going to be equally damaging to them mentally as well as potentially physically. I think it's just, they frequently call it like, it's the spark that starts the forest fire. And so all of that can arise from that type of anger. Whole wars are started on the basis of anger between peoples, between borders, about borders, about various, things that, again, lots of other delusions play a role. Because we can often say, and Venerable Rabina highlights this, one of her lamas said, that essentially anger is simply the mind that manifests when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So we see that there's a role that some of these other delusions play in it, but anger is that reaction to that. Okay, I'm not getting what I want, things are going south. I need to retaliate. I need to lash out. So I think it's just the force of that. I don't know that I've ever heard anything more that, it's a very powerful negative mind. Much more powerful than the other ones that I pointed out. Now, again, anger has its degrees too, right? It can go all the way to, what would you call it? I mean, just where your hatred that's really venomous and, malicious. That's much different than just an irritation or annoyance at somebody. But it's heading in that direction. Again, it's the spark that can lead to a larger and larger forest fire. So, analogy that works well in dry places like here in New Mexico. So the other thing I want to touch on before we and this is actually an important part of creating merit, is to really look at another teaching that comes from the teachings on karma in the Lamrim, in the stages of the path, which again, most of you have studied. The section on karma in the Lamrim Chenmo is perhaps the most extensive Lama Tsongkhapa's. And this one is interesting. It's frequently discussed. Usually what you see in terms of karma, the first topic is the 4 general characteristics I just went into. And then it talks about the 10 non-virtues, these actions that we want to avoid. And it goes into 6 factors that create heavier negative actions, really, is where it's primarily introduced. Then it goes on generally, there might be some additional small topics in there, but then it goes on to the white actions, the virtuous actions. And the topic taught immediately after that is what are called the 4 ways that we increase the power of an action. Now, the heaviness of an action is the term that's used when we talk about the negative ones. It seems that the way that this is presented is to really help us to accentuate the power of our positive actions. So these 4, there are 4 main factors that influence they often are called like the power of our actions. They do have their corollaries in terms of the negative ones, don't get me wrong, but they're frequently presented because we can see that we can increase the power of our actions through these 4 factors, these 4 ways. So the first one is the power of our intention or our attitude. Now, what do you think is the most powerful positive intention or attitude you can bring to an action? Bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is said to be the most powerful positive mind because, first of all, it's intent upon the greatest possible results of enlightenment. This is the full potential that ourselves as a sentient being, as well as all other beings, have. But it's not just that full, complete result. It's for every single sentient being. That's why we have to train in bodhicitta and develop compassion and loving kindness for every single being, not be blocked to having that towards difficult people, difficult presidents, whoever it is that's pushing our buttons. Okay. So we have to be sure that we can cultivate a much more far-reaching and embracing mind of compassion and loving kindness. On the basis of that, we become dedicated to the welfare of those beings, and we want to become a Buddha for their sake. That's bodhicitta. So it's powerful because it's embracing all beings. You have the foundation of every single being, every ant, every small being that's in the ocean, every bird in the sky, every worm in the ground. Every single being, not just in this world, but in every realm of existence. Every one of these beings is the object of that. So if you have that level of mind, when you're doing some of the simplest actions, you will create unbelievable merit. I try to be very vigilant in remembering this when I go out. We usually have birds that come to feed in our yard in Santa Fe. And, and if you think about, I'm feeding these birds, giving them this seed so that all beings can become enlightened. Well, then it changes that action into something where every one of those bits of seed that you're handing to those birds becomes incredibly powerful in the results that it can bring about. If you're feeding your pets, think that you're feeding your pets with bodhicitta. This isn't just a single action about my dog or my cat getting food from me, which is virtuous. It's a simple action that is virtuous. You do get virtue just by doing that, out of your own generosity, feeding an animal. But you can make it so much more by bringing this mind of bodhicitta to it, that you are doing these actions with this much vaster intention that's going to have incredible benefits, So this is why it's highlighted there as like the most important. Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, we can collect infinite merit, by doing this, with having bodhicitta. And Geshe Loden, he lived in Australia. He passed away a few years ago, and he's got a wonderful Lamrim text. He says, giving to just one person or animal with pure bodhicitta motivation creates merit equal to giving to all living beings, whereas giving without creates just the merit of giving to a single person, single being. So bodhicitta is the way of, again, increasing the power of those actions. So if you're going to do any of these actions, do it with bodhicitta.
So,
do it.
Sorry, so Don, what would that look like? So if I gave a homeless person $1, which I did the other day, but I didn't think anything, I just gave the person the $1.
Right.
So what am I supposed to be thinking? How do I make that into a am I supposed to think of just this one person becoming a Buddha, or what am I supposed to be thinking?
I would say what you're supposed to be thinking when you're doing a particular action like that is bringing this mind of bodhicitta that hopefully, again, we've developed some familiarity with it through the techniques that are taught, the sevenfold cause and effect, equalizing and exchanging self and others. If we've generated some familiarity with that mind, then we think, I am intent upon benefiting all beings by becoming a Buddha. Through this act of giving this $1 to this one being, may it become the cause for me to do that. May it become the cause for me to help all sentient beings, including this being, to become fully enlightened through my own enlightenment. So it just means that we have to have that ability to bring that to mind, bodhicitta. And then when we do the action, it goes so far beyond just the temporal benefit of that $1 for that being to be able to eat or whatever that being needs. It becomes far-reaching in terms of, not in the moment, alleviating the suffering of all beings and bringing them all to enlightenment, but over time being able to accumulate that result, to create that result. So bodhicitta again, until we have spontaneous bodhicitta or uncontrived bodhicitta, we're going to have to go through some thought process. We're going to have to remember to do it. Lama Zopa actually calls this bodhicitta mindfulness. And there's a wonderful set of exercises and ways to go into it. I think you have a copy of it up there, the book called Bodhisattva Attitude, or maybe you don't, I don't know. I think it's out of print right now. It's a free book of the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive. You can go there and download it. You can, find all the teachings out there. But Lama Zopa goes into this. There's another little one that's called Cultivating Mindfulness of Bodhicitta and Daily Activities that the FPMT publishes. I don't remember if I purchased this to download it and make it, but what Rinpoche recommends is that you do these practices when you're doing even your more mundane activities, not when you're engaging just in, like I was describing, generosity, or what you were describing, Casey, of giving $1, giving seed to birds, giving food to your pets. He suggests using any activity that we're doing. And so, for example, the first section is on lying down, sleeping, waking, standing, sitting. So, for example, when you stand up, you think, may all sentient beings rise up from the oceans of samsaric sufferings. It's like you're bringing a bodhicitta thought to that action. Now, you can do it just by thinking bodhicitta, but sometimes it's helpful to have these little slogans. So when you sit down, you think, I am bringing all sentient beings to the heart of enlightenment. The next section is bathing, washing, brushing your teeth. So while you're washing your face, you think, I am washing away all the stains of delusions of all sentient beings, or in the shower, washing, whatever. You make these ordinary actions into powerful actions because you bring bodhicitta motivation into them. And he didn't come up with these as like a cutesy little thing to do. These are from the sutras of the Buddha, many of these. They've been adapted for our times as well, because, he uses things like when you get into a car or whatever. The Buddha didn't have cars, obviously, so. But what I love about it is that, it includes things like going to the toilet, blowing your nose, So, how often do we do these things? Opening a door, closing a door. You change our thoughts around those mundane actions. And it is hard to do, admittedly. It's best to take a few of these, or maybe just one of these, and you just say, okay, I'm going to change the way I think about getting in and out of, going in and out of a room, and so you keep practicing with that one. And then eventually you have that thought a bit more spontaneously. So it's not maybe the full process of developing bodhicitta, but it's at least having the thought, that when you enter into the room, for example, this is another one of these sections. I think the idea is you say that you're bringing sentient beings into the city of enlightenment or something. See if I can find that one. When you walk, drive a car, ride a bike, travel on a bus, that's the one where you think, I am bringing all sentient beings to enlightenment. Going into a holy place, when you enter into the Gompa here, you can think, I am bringing all sentient beings into the city of the sorrowless state. Again, the words are not quite as important as the sentiment, to make sure that we have some way to trigger a different thought when we do ordinary things. But it takes mindfulness. That's why he calls this cultivating mindfulness of bodhicitta. So first you have to do the work on the cushion to get really familiar with bodhicitta, and then you have to have the mindfulness that recalls to do that. But start simple. Say, okay, I'm going to just start with every time I feed my dog, or every time I feed the birds, or every time I give $1 to a homeless person, I'm going to make that intention of, may all beings have everything they need all the way up to enlightenment. You can create your own verses. You don't have to use what's in here. These are, some that are helpful. Bodhicitta mindfulness is a very powerful tool to make even the most mundane actions, like going to the toilet, into the cause for enlightenment. What a gift. Lama Zopa, he's taught on this extensively at the Light of the Path retreat. One year he went into quite a bit of teachings on this. And it's just so helpful. He even quizzed people at the end of the retreat to see how well they did at practicing these during the retreat. He says, if you're in retreat, you should be practicing these all the time. He wasn't trying to, make us feel horrible because we didn't do it, but it was just encouraging us to say, hey, this is one opportunity where you don't have all these other distractions. You're not out there going to your job and doing all the other things that distract us away from these spiritual motivations. You're here on retreat. So if you can't do it then, when are you going to do it? But anyway. So I would really encourage you to look into this idea of bodhicitta mindfulness because of this first one, the power of our intention, the power of our attitude. Now on the other side, when we talk about it as a negative action, as I said, these are usually presented right after the virtuous actions because they're a really important way to emphasize what we do that is positive, the meritorious things we do to make them more powerful. But we obviously see that the most powerful mind on the other side of the fence is the mind of anger. So we have to do what we can to curtail that, to avoid that. Because it's like a direct, like the flame of bodhicitta is immediately put out by this water of anger, whatever. It's the opposite analogy of before, but we see that we can't really keep our bodhicitta motivation going if we're getting angry at beings. We're intent upon enlightening them over here, and here we're intent upon harming them. These are incongruous. They don't mesh. So what we have to do is really put that intention into strengthening our bodhicitta, weakening our anger, and then we'll have this amazing mind that will help us to accumulate all kinds of virtue. Very powerful mind. Any questions or comments on that? Yeah, David.
What about working with the other side of it, the emptiness side? And I try to do that sometimes when I'm facing the anger side of it or the difficulties side of it, and remembering that this thing that's making me angry or this person that's making me angry actually is not inherently existent from their own side. It diffuses the solidity of the quote-unquote perpetrator. For me, but and then I can get back to the bodhicitta a little bit better. But it's I find myself using this as a strategy that works. But what do you think? Is there something to that?
I mean, I think it's useful to talk at some point in the evening about uniting these two. And this is why, again, I was saying earlier that they aren't separate. It's not like we just hang out over on the merit side and it'll all take care of itself. We have to unite it with wisdom. Rinpoche, even when he dedicates, encourages those kinds of thoughts. You probably have read dedication prayers that Rinpoche has or heard them, where he says, may I, who am empty from my own side, achieve enlightenment, which is empty from its own side. And like all of these ways of reminding ourselves of that. Certainly when we start dealing with the delusions, recalling emptiness is one of the most powerful ways to undermine that. So absolutely, unite these two as much as possible. If you can bring kind of a bodhicitta motivation in conjunction with an awareness of emptiness. This is why one course that I sometimes teach goes back to some studies I did in the master's program. The very beginning of Chandrakirti's text, it's called the Supplement to the Middle Way. He talks about 3 types of compassion. And of course, compassion is the root for bodhicitta. And the first one is just the compassion where we observe the suffering of others. This is what we normally call compassion, right? Where we understand the ways that beings are suffering and we generate that strong wish that we could remove their suffering. The second one is where we see sentient beings. We're not thinking about their suffering as much as we're thinking about the fact that they're qualified by impermanence, that they are changing moment by moment and never the same, and of course changing lifetime to lifetime. And we're thinking about it, the beings in that way. Why? Because that's one of the greatest sources of their suffering, is that people cling to themselves and things as if they're not going to change, but everything keeps changing. You can't stop the process of change. I mean, why do people get so bent out of shape seeing their bodies grow old, seeing, things go out of their life that they thought they could rely upon? It's because things are impermanent. So we qualify sentient beings when we observe them through the lens of compassion, understanding their impermanence. We become even stronger by uniting our compassion with wisdom, understanding that beings are going against this reality, this fact of existence, when they hold to things being unchanging, in the midst of them always changing. The third level is where we apply the emptiness teachings, the deeper level of wisdom. There's the wisdom of impermanence, but there's the wisdom of emptiness, where we understand that sentient beings lack inherent existence. We see them qualified in that way, that there is no real being there, and they are clinging to it as if there is a real being there. And by real, I mean this exaggerated way that we think of ourselves. Not saying there's no being at all, but there is no being that is held to exist in the way that those beings think that they exist, just like we're doing that right now. So when we see sentient beings through that lens, we've united our compassion with an even deeper wisdom, because we're now looking at those beings in the light of their lack of inherent existence. We are seeing them together, not just the compassion, but together with the wisdom of emptiness. So absolutely, this is an important part of it. And I think we create even greater merit by virtue of uniting it with that mind as well, because we are seeing things more clearly. We create a merit that is acting in tandem with the other wing, with the wing of wisdom. So we have both of these kind of helping us move forward. Yeah, David?
Just a comment on that. I really love Nagarjuna a lot. And in his commentary on the awakening mind, the bodhicitta is the relative and the ultimate bodhicitta. So the ultimate bodhicitta is referent to emptiness itself. So there's no separation. At when you get to a certain discussion on it.
Yeah, I mean, we could say for the bodhisattva, these are absolutely like the two bodhicittas then. The bodhicitta that initially is based on compassion, that is there, and then on the basis of that, the realization of emptiness that is combined with that, the wisdom that is in that bodhisattva's mind. And it's unique to the Mahayana in that regard, because we can have the wisdom of emptiness on the lower path, on the path of the Hinayana practitioners, and it's not united with bodhicitta. It's not called ultimate bodhicitta there, because there's never any conventional bodhicitta there. But with somebody who is a bodhisattva who's practicing that is kind of where the two get united at a deeper way, when there's that direct realization. But until we get there, we do what we can to combine both of those minds. Absolutely. Kind of keeps us also from somewhat clinging to all of that merit. There's a tendency sometimes when we're accumulating merit and to get a bit full of ourselves and think, oh, aren't we such great people at doing that? Well, that's a misconception about how we exist. We don't exist in that, again, real, concrete, solid way. Better to be a lot looser around it. That's why Rinpoche encourages us to dedicate our merits with emptiness, to understand emptiness as a part of the whole process. Because that is the ultimate antidote to all of this. We have to have that wisdom of emptiness. Increasing our merit with that mind conjoined with it can be really powerful. So absolutely, I thank you for bringing that up. I think it's something, again, I would touch on at some point in this, but it was perfectly fine there in terms of this intention of bodhicitta. Let's go on to the second one that is talked about. Once more, these are the 4 factors that kind of increase the power of our actions. Particularly, we're looking at it in terms of our meritorious actions. The second one is the power of the object. And this is kind of interesting. Once more, we don't have inherently existent objects, but we do have objects that in conventional terms are more powerful than others. So, great to feed the birds. I'm not discouraging anybody from feeding the birds. I feed the birds every day when I can. I love feeding the birds. But if we just feed birds and we don't take care of other sentient beings, or we don't do other actions in regard to other more powerful objects, we're not taking advantage of some of the real ways that we can increase our positive potential. Do all these things, but do also the things that are much more powerful in terms of helping us to achieve the result. Again, without any clinging to it. This isn't about trying to inflate our ego in any way. This is about acknowledging that there are certain objects that will have a more powerful result for us. Is there any guesses about what is the most powerful object of our actions? Our guru. Very good, Casey. Yes, this is the most powerful object of our actions. So they say if we want to achieve enlightenment quickly, the guru is there to help us to do that. That actions done in relation to the guru. And it doesn't have to be even in relation to, like, I have to find a guru and give something to them or do something there. We can think of our guru in terms of all the actions that we engage in. So if we're doing water bowl offerings, for example, like are done here in the altar, and you've got these statues that are there. You have the statue that represents the enlightened body. You have the text that represents the enlightened speech. You have the stupa that represents the enlightened mind. You think that all those objects that you're making the offerings to, as well as any other visualized Buddhas or beings or whatever, that they're all the same essence as your guru. You hold that thought. It's as if, again, you're giving to your guru. You're holding your guru to be equivalent to all of that. So this is how we create the most merit, is by doing actions in relation to our guru. And of course, we also make actions in relation to our guru when we're involved in a center like this. You know, we're part of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's mandala or whatever other gurus that we have in this tradition that we're involved with. You know, if you have another guru in another tradition, you're part of their mandala, and by offering your service and other things, resources to those organizations, that's making offerings to the guru. You know, everything that you do, again, with that motivation of bodhicitta first, you know, that'd be a nice place to start, but towards the guru then, thinking that I'm going to serve the guru in whatever way. We're not all going to serve the guru in the same way. You know, I was told by my teacher over in Italy, Geshe Jampa Gyatso, to go out and teach. You know, this was how he wanted me to create merit in this life, how he wanted me to, you know, work with these teachings in my life. But not everybody's going to do that, and that's okay. You know, some people need to clean the carpet and, you know, vacuum the center and, you know, do the dishes and do the shopping and do the, you know, the advertising and do the website. And I mean, we have so many opportunities to get involved in helping the work of our gurus, you know, because this center exists to fulfill the wishes of our gurus, which are to bring all sentient beings to enlightenment. So anything we do to contribute in that way is very powerful. Certainly, if you can give resources to the gurus, this is also a really wonderful way to be a benefit to them. You know, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I'm always amazed at his complete lack of attachment to things. At the end of Light of the Path, for example, several occasions we've seen this just happen right there on the spot, where all these people making offerings after the weeks of retreat conclude, you know, and there's this pile of envelopes that are just like stacked up. He just says, all of these go to the project that the center has here, whatever, Kadampa Center, which is our center in Raleigh that sponsors that retreat. He doesn't even he doesn't take them all apart and say, well, I'm going to keep these for myself. And, you know, he just says all of this just goes, you know, it's just like he's a conduit to receive all of this and put it into projects that are there to benefit beings. You know, so the gurus aren't like, you know, it's not like, I don't know if anybody saw the documentary on Netflix, Wild Wild Country. It's about the Rajneesh and the community up in Oregon and all of this. Pretty distressing thing to watch in terms of how a community can be somewhat misled in terms of these sorts of material things and what have you. What I've seen in our tradition, at least, you know, and I'm not speaking to this other than to speak of Rinpoche's amazing qualities, is that resources come into him and they're just a conduit again for them to go out for other projects. You know, he really has doesn't have like a whole fleet of Mercedes and whatever, and Rolls Royces. Yeah, it was the Rolls Royces that Rajneesh liked. You know, this isn't how Rinpoche lives, and it isn't how His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, lives. I mean, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, would probably walk to every teaching if he could. You know, he doesn't. But, you know, there's limousines and there's all this kind of care for him because of students who care about him and want to make sure he's taken care of. You know, he's flying first class because of all of that. It's not that these teachers are holding on to these material comforts in any way. So, back to this idea. Anything we do that benefits our gurus, very powerful actions. So we should be thinking of our gurus frequently. Lama Zopa himself says the highest or most powerful object is the virtuous friend. The Dharma connection makes the guru the most powerful object in your life. And again, you become somebody's disciple. They become your guru by virtue of your own free will and choosing that. It's not that gurus are imposed upon you. You can't say, oh, I'm going to the FPMT center. Now I've got Lama Zopa as my guru. You know, no, you make the decision whether Lama Zopa is your guru. But if you decide on somebody as your guru, you've got that karmic connection, and it's important to honor that and to see that this is the most important connection that you can have to any being, because that's the being who's going to lead you to enlightenment. One virtuous friend, Rinpoche says, is a much more powerful object than numberless Buddhas. There's even a story about how, like, one student, he was in the his room meditating or something, and this amazing vision of like his main tantric deity appeared before him. And then his guru walked in at the same time, and he had to make a decision about which one to bow to first. And he bowed to the vision of this deity, and the story is that essentially he chose wrong. He chose door number 1 and he should have chose door number 2. Because there is no tantric deity without the guru. None of these things exist without the guru. And of course I don't want to veer too much into guru devotion teachings because it's a bit of a slippery slope. Before you know it, we'll be here all night talking about guru devotion. But in this tradition, we really see that who the gurus are for us is they are the Buddhas appearing for us. They are what that enlightened mind, enlightened body, enlightened speech looks like. We think it's all these things up here, but it's appearing in that physical form for our benefit. And that's why these beings keep getting reincarnated and keep showing up here, is because from their side, that's what Buddhas do. They're dedicated to the welfare of others, and they're meeting us through their kindness, exactly in the way that we can benefit from them. Lama Zopa has said, we're so fortunate that our gurus appear in human form and don't appear as like dogs, because we would never be able to learn from a dog in terms of the teachings that a dog can give us are quite limited. Probably hardly anything, right? So we have this amazing fortune of having these beings in our lives. Use that. Take advantage of that. The next, in terms of objects, I want to also point out that kind of the next sort of, as you descend down from there, in a sense of kind of what are more powerful objects, and this is just to be aware of this, is that of course Buddhas, meaning like any other Buddhas in any other form. So our guru, your root guru in particular, but also any other gurus you have are at the top of the list. Buddhas, bodhisattvas, what are called arhats or foe destroyers, those who have completed the path of eliminating their own afflictions, attain that state of liberation. Ordained sangha is next. And then after that are parents of this life. And then after that would be ordinary human beings, and then they tend to put human beings on a scale above animals, but I don't want to get too speciesist about it or something. I think it's important that we acknowledge benefiting any being is important. But your parents of this life are actually much, much more powerful than any other, these ordinary people that are in your life. So it's important that we do tend to them in the best way possible. And not all of us have the best history with our parents. So again, virtuous actions, meritorious actions towards our parents can be very powerful in and of themselves. But know that it's by the power of the relationship that we have with that object. It's not something inherent within it. It's the fact that they are there playing a particular role for us. And your parents have been incredibly kind to you. Just by giving you this body, they've been incredibly kind. So just know that there's ways that we can use that knowledge of the object, the power of the object, to increase our positive potential by paying attention to that. Sometimes in tantric practices, this is part of it, is you try to see all beings as the manifestation of your guru, of the enlightened mind and whatever. And that means that, when you see that homeless person, you can think, homage to my guru, and give, them that offering or whatever. They may not actually be an emanation of your guru, but you can hold that view, you can hold that thought, or think that again, through the kindness of your guru, you're repaying the kindness by helping that suffering sentient being. Let me go through these other two a little more quickly, because there's not maybe as much to discuss, and then I want to spend a little time before we leave talking about some of the actions that I would encourage you to adopt on a somewhat regular basis if you can, in the way of kind of tending to creating merit. But the third one is the power of the subject. So what do we mean by this? We mean that essentially by the level of vows that the person possesses, and that person would be you as the person creating these meritorious actions. By the virtue of that, you create more powerful karma. This is why vows are encouraged, not, required. I don't want to make it sound like, again, everybody has to take vows. Nonetheless, I have heard some teachers in our tradition say that if we're not taking vows, if you've been involved in Buddhism for a while and you're not taking the vows, you might really investigate kind of what's the problem, what's keeping you from doing that. Because vows are there as once more, a continuity all the way back to the Buddha. Through his kindness and compassion, he gave the technique of taking vows as a very powerful way to increase our positive potential and the force of our restraining from negative actions. All of the vows tend to be about mostly restraining from negativity, but they also, and the bodhisattva vows in particular, get more into upholding virtuous behavior, benefiting others, and so on. So vows are really, I know people when they hear vows, if you haven't taken vows, you start thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to get myself into? This is like a really heavy thing to put on. It's like helping you, if you think about, if you had this huge forest kind of like out in front of you and you didn't know which direction to go, you just keep kind of wandering until maybe you found the path. With the vows, you kind of limit things to, oh, okay, this is the path. This is where I need to go. So vows are a really helpful tool because they keep us on track. They keep us moving in the direction we want to move in. Now, most of the vows we can actually try on. You know, when you get to tantric vows, they encourage you to take those with secrecy so that you don't know prior. You know, it's only those who've taken the vows that ideally should know them. So you do have a bit of a leap there. But by then you've kind of worked with vows, hopefully. The first level of the 3 vows is what's called pratimoksha, or individual liberation vows. And there are different levels of those. For lay people, as all of us in the room are, there are the 5 lay vows. And most preceptors in this tradition give any combination of those. So you don't have to sign up for all 5. But you can live with all 5 right now. Try what it's like to not kill, to not steal, to not engage in adultery or any other harmful, sexual behavior, to not lie, and to not take alcohol and intoxicants. Maybe you can try on one of those or a few of those and see what it's like and gain some conviction that you can do that and then take the vow. When you take the vow, and I'm not going to go on to bodhisattva vows and explain all of them, they're made way too complicated for tonight. The 18 root downfalls, 46 secondary downfalls. But you can study those. You can try them on. You can say, okay, what is it like? Go to teachings on them, read books on them. Anyway, with let's say the vow to not kill. If you take the vow to not kill and you refrain from killing, yeah, you get the positive action at that time. But even when you're asleep and you're not even threatened by beings, there's nothing even there to kill. You are accumulating the merit of that. You are developing that positive potential. Whereas if you don't take the vow, then the only time that you really get kind of the positive potential of refraining from killing, engaging in that positive action, is when there is a being there that you're thinking, oh, I should kill it, but I'm going to refrain. When you take the vow, you're getting that positive potential all the time. Now, of course, there's another side to this. This is powerful medicine, so there's also powerful risks. If you do kill a being when you're holding the vow, it's also much heavier karma in terms of the negative karma. But the positive karma you can create subjectively when you're holding vows is so much greater, because every day that you hold your vows purely, every minute that you hold your vows purely, every second that you hold your vows purely, you're creating unbelievable potential. It's like the merit clock is continually running, giving you lots and lots of delicious merit. Because you made the strong intention in front of a preceptor and made the vow that you will not kill again in this life. You will not intentionally take the life of another being in this life. As long as you hold it purely, you're going to continue to create that vow even when you're asleep, or create the karma of that vow, the positive potential of that vow, even when you're asleep. The last one is sometimes called the power of phenomena, or the substance of the action. And this is pointed out in regard to particular actions where we can have a more powerful thing that we are doing, or giving in some cases, because giving is the one that's most frequently cited. So does anybody have any idea what's the most powerful thing we can give to another? What's the most powerful substance that we can give? Substance makes it sound like something physical, but anyway, what do you think is like the most powerful thing that we can give to others?
Compassion.
Compassion's related. Compassion's a good thing to give to others, and loving kindness to others. They say that the most powerful thing we can give is the Dharma, his teachings, And again, don't think then I can't do that because I'm not sitting in the teacher seat and Don's sitting in the teacher seat, so he gets to do that karma, I have to do something else. No, we all can share the Dharma in ways that we find useful and skillful. It doesn't mean that, everywhere we go, we just try to, proselytize the Dharma and go door to door and say, can I talk to you about the Buddha today? And leave them a Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive book and say, here, I'll come back and talk to you again if you'd like, No, It means that you have to find skillful ways in your own life to be able to share what you have learned with others that will help them in accord with, again, from a compassionate motivation, from your love for them, that will help them to develop more ability to use their minds wisely, to use their lives wisely. Again, and we don't have to even package it as Dharma. And I'm not saying we should do this by stealth. I'm just saying that if we sense that there's some resistance to it because they're thinking, oh, here comes that Buddhist claptrap or something, well then, say, well, I'd like to share some thoughts with you about, some way of looking at this that might be helpful. Are you interested in that? You don't have to get into, again, force-feeding anybody anything or even labeling it as Buddhism. A lot of people just need somebody to talk to that will help them to see that there's other ways of looking at it. Because everyone gets very narrowly on the same track, if somebody's doing something that I disagree with, then I have to get angry at it. I have to do all this. Well, they need to have an alternative to that frequently. If you are in a position where you've got a closeness to that being, to that person, because of your relationship, your friendship with them, then you can be a means of helping them to learn a little bit about working with their mind. It doesn't mean that you have to make them Buddhist. It doesn't mean that you have to, again, give them every bit of Dharma. It means that you can just give them what you know, what you've achieved from your own experience, or even share your own experience. And it might be useful. And even if the person says, well, thanks a lot, but I want nothing to ever to do with you again, at least you extended it to the best of your ability and within your own knowledge of what you thought would be useful. We're not always going to be useful to others. That's one reason why we have to become enlightened, is because until we have that mind that knows the minds of all beings, we won't know exactly how to benefit them. But it shouldn't stop us from trying. So the substance that we give, giving Dharma, is more powerful than giving material things. But if it calls for material things and not Dharma, if that homeless person comes up to you and says, I need $1 so I can eat, you don't say, well, let me tell you a little teaching about karma. Maybe if you took them to the restaurant and sat down with them and ate a meal with them, you might get an opportunity to talk to them a little bit about karma, but that's not what that person needs at the moment, Yes, David.
Just a comment, yeah. I've taken to texting my children with Dharma messages, and a lot of times it's not, it's not all this. It's just overlapping with many other religions, and
sure.
It's just basic kindness and basic goodness and
Wonderful.
Respect and virtue and all that stuff that actually matters. And you're not, not getting into Buddhahood and in full enlightenment,
right.
And bodhicitta all the time.
Yeah. That's
simple
perfect.
Stuff can be helpful.
Yeah. And I think we have to remember, His Holiness talks about how the diverse spiritual traditions that exist in this world, they're all there to help sentient beings, and it doesn't always have to, we can even help somebody to better understand their own faith through a lens of Buddhism. This is what His Holiness had the good fortune to do with a group of people. There's a book called The Good Heart, where it documents his presenting his own Buddhist take on a lot of the Christian Gospels to a Christian audience. And most of the people in the audience didn't come away Buddhists. They came away having a deeper faith in their own teachings because of His Holiness's perspective. So yeah, we package it in whatever way. We package it as just good common sense or good wisdom that we can share with others. Or we take the teachings of Christ and help them to perhaps understand them if they're Christian or whatever the case might be. I was sometimes when this topic comes up, I think about when I was at a teaching in Milan when I was studying over in Italy. I had the fortune to see His Holiness almost every year because he would always come to some part of Europe. It would seem sometimes twice in a year. And there were some teachings in Milan in 1999, and of course Italy is a very Catholic country, so you had a lot of people that came to the teachings that weren't Buddhists. And he would answer questions periodically, and one of the questions he was asked was, who is Jesus Christ in the Buddhist perspective? How do Buddhists see Jesus Christ? Who is He? And the answer that His Holiness gave was that because He had an incredible impact on the well-being of so many beings in this world, has helped beings to know better morality in many ways, to know all of these things. He said because of that positive impact, he would have to be a bodhisattva or a Buddha, perhaps a Buddha, but at least a Bodhisattva, because you couldn't have that kind of positive impact on that many beings without some high level of realization. So then I started thinking about it, going, well, does that mean that what he taught was the Dharma? Well, at some level, you can't really deny that if this is a Buddha or a Bodhisattva teaching in 2,000 years in that region of the world, well, then it's the Dharma being packaged for the people of that time. And so there's a sacredness to any spiritual tradition, I think, if we think that there are these enlightened forces that are manifesting as whoever, trying to help people in various regions to have something that they can work with to develop more compassion, to be more in touch with, things. Well, then it's all Dharma at some level. I don't want to make that sound like too... I think we still have to, when we as Buddhists take refuge in the Dharma, we do mean the specific corpus of teachings that the Buddha taught that are here, that are very valid for us who are practicing this. But yeah, the teachings that Christ taught are Dharma in their own way, because they're coming also from that same wisdom and that compassion of that being, that holy being. So, great stuff to be able to teach or share whatever we can. And it doesn't have to be a formal teaching. Again, it can be just very casual. Another one that's included in this, usually around the action, or the substance of the action, is that if our practice of creating positive actions is more continuous and constant, then it becomes more powerful. This is why you're encouraged to do things on a very regular basis. Water bowl offerings, for example. Try to do them every day. If you have adopted this practice, know about this practice, and it's one that is suited to your mind, then make it a regular practice every day. Make that your ritual of being in that space of giving to the gurus in the form of the objects on your altar, and make that very, do it with bodhicitta, all these other things. But it becomes more powerful by virtue of it, that action being repeated, being there continually, day in and day out. Geshe Sherab, who was here earlier, who also teaches at the center where I teach in Santa Fe, really encourages people to have a continuity of practice. This is one of the things I hear him say frequently. And I think we can't deny that there's some karmic thing that's quite obvious about that. How do we change our minds? By doing something virtuous repeatedly, again and again, just like the bodhicitta mindfulness I was talking about. If every day we practice this way, it becomes more powerful. And it becomes a part of the fabric of our being. So the categories of things that in the last 10 minutes or so that I have here that I just want to emphasize, the first one is like offering, which is something I've already touched on. There are a number of offering practices. There's actually, we can even just visualize and send out what we experience in terms of our everyday sense objects. You hear some delightful music, you can offer it. You don't have to do a whole formal ceremony and whatever. You have that thought, okay, here's this delicious, delightful whatever that I'm experiencing, dessert, or a smell, a fragrance that's really pleasing, or getting a massage. You're getting all this wonderful tactile sensation through your body. You offer it. You do what you can to send that out to the Buddhas, to your gurus, to all sentient beings. Do whatever you can to increase your positive potential by virtue of just the ordinary experiences you have with sense objects. How many times a day do we experience something delightful with our senses? Countless, right? Many, many times. So make those into regular offering practices. You don't even have to get water bowls for this, right? You just do what you're doing and make it into something meritorious. I remember when I was in Amsterdam, my last year and a half being in the master's program, I decided that before I left Europe, I needed to go travel a bit more. I traveled whenever His Holiness was teaching, so I got to see some pretty amazing places by virtue of that. I think the one time that got me really thinking about I needed to travel more was when I went to Paris. His Holiness taught for 7 days in Paris, and I stayed on for a few days, and I go, wow, I would have been a shame had I not made it to Paris while I was that close. So I went to Amsterdam, and they have all those amazing flower markets there, and it's just you can stand there and just offer flowers. You're just seeing them, And you can think, some people might think, well, but those aren't they're yours to offer. They belong to the people who, well, you're offering your own experience of that. It doesn't have to be necessarily, because you're not taking them, you're not stealing them outright and doing anything with them. It's fine to have that kind of mind that is your experience of seeing beautiful things, hearing beautiful things, and so on. Offering a practice, especially, again, service to the Dharma Center, service to the Dharma itself in whatever you do. Offering, your daily practice is a way of making sure that we have that connection, especially to our gurus. Mandala offerings that I mentioned earlier, not just, most of us know the hand mudra and all of this and reciting the prayer. There's the whole mandala set that many of you are familiar with, where you go through the whole visualization of the cosmology that is set out in the traditional teachings and offer this vast pure offering. It's very powerful to do that, very important practice for merit making. As I said, Lama Tsongkhapa himself did many of those. Pujas. I don't know how frequently you do pujas here at the center, but whenever they are occurring, puja essentially is an offering ceremony. The most powerful one in some ways is the Guru Puja, where we work with our gurus, but even like a Tara Puja or a Medicine Buddha Puja, because we can hold those beings as the same essence as our gurus in those forms. They're all powerful. Puja practices are very important as another offering. And then, as I said earlier, offerings to your own guru, to their projects, especially on these special Buddha days. Many of you know about these. These are like better than double coupon day at the Safeway. On those days you get 100 million times the merit, according to this sutra that Rinpoche found. So the main days of the year, as most of you know, it starts with right after Losar. There's 2 weeks that lead up to the Day of Miracles, which is the first full moon of the new lunar calendar. Then you have Sakadawa, which just happened last month in May, the end of May. And then you have the first wheel turning, which is coming up in July. I think it's around the 16th or 17th. Again, all these dates you can find on the Liberation Prison Project calendar, or even if you just go to FPMT's website, you can check the calendar on a regular basis and see where those are happening. But that's the third big day. The fourth big day is what's called the descent from the realm of the 33, when the Buddha had gone to this realm where his mother Maya was reborn so that he could teach the gods in that realm. And then everybody who was left back in this planet said, hey, come back, made strong prayers for him to return. And so that's the day that he descended from that God realm to come back to teach again, to keep the wheel of Dharma going in this world. Those 4 days are said to be very powerful. Even like the full period of the Days of Miracles are all quite powerful. And also I've heard that the first 2 weeks of the month of Sakadawa, because Sakadawa is the full moon of the 4th month of the lunar year. So again, that was like from mid-May till mid-June. It's probably more or less over by now, I would think. So that month, the first 2 weeks when the moon is waxing, are said to be really powerful in that month as well. But those 4 days in particular, it's good to pay attention to those and to do meritorious actions on those days. It's like a missed opportunity. Otherwise, you had, something better than double coupon day and you didn't go. So offering to ordained Sangha and parents, I mentioned these as powerful objects already. Ordained Sangha, you're really encouraged to offer to. And we can see in the world that we live in, especially with Western Sangha, that a lot of them depend upon support from outside. A lot of them are trying to dedicate their lives to a life of practice. It's not that they're lazy and don't want to work. It's that they really genuinely are dedicated to the Dharma. They wouldn't shave their heads and put on robes if they weren't. So it's important to support people who are making that choice with their lives to dedicate in that way. So it's good to sponsor their education or retreats, any of these things, so... Then that's all offerings. That's all in that category. And so there's a variety of things. And any offering you make, like I said, offering the bird seed or the dog food or whatever, it can all be a very meritorious practice with the right states of mind. Another one, set of practices would be things around prayers and mantras, making and using prayer wheels, Most of you know what prayer wheels are. Down at Land of Medicine Buddha, down the way, there's a wonderful large prayer wheel. These are said to be meritorious because of the mantras themselves that these wheels are filled with. And when we make that strong intention for the power of those mantras to be, to alleviate the suffering of the world, to help other sentient beings by turning the prayer wheels, they become very powerful, meritorious actions. Prayer flags. Maybe other prayer flags outside. Anyway, prayer flags are good to fly, to put up on particularly auspicious days. Animal liberation with mantra recitation. This practice I think many of you are familiar with. Liberating animals who are in danger of death. In Santa Fe, what we tend to do, because it's easiest, is particularly in the warmer months of the year when people would normally be out taking worms, fishing with them, to put on hooks, is we'll go to the places like the Walmarts and that and try to buy as many of the worms out of all these little containers, each with like 25, 30 worms in them. And then we bring them to the center, and we do circumambulations with them around stupas. We do mantra recitation, bless the water after we've done the mantra recitation, and then pour the water, a little bit of the water on the worms, and then bring the worms to some place where they can find a nice home that's cool and moist so that they don't dry up in the hot summer sun in Santa Fe. But so this is a nice practice to do because you're taking beings who would end up suffering, such as these worms who would be bound to end up on a hook or die in a container if they're not used, and you're giving them not just a new lease on life by putting them in a compost pile or something. You're also changing their mental continuum by reciting these mantras for them. They wouldn't hear those mantras if you didn't do that for them. So I think any of these practices around mantras are really quite beneficial. Mantras are said to be the speech of those Buddhas. So that's a very important practice to do when we can. Holy objects is the third category. So you can make and sort of commission holy objects to be made. You can do holy objects yourself through the practice of satsas. I'm sure there's satsas here somewhere. There's certainly some of these stupas are even what would be considered satsas. Satsa practice is where you have a mold, and with various rituals you fill the mold with a sort of plaster of Paris and put various things inside there and say various prayers over it, and then when it dries you can paint them and they can be used as holy objects. It's a very wonderful practice to engage in. Printing and reciting sutras and other Dharma texts, because the Dharma itself is so powerful, it's really nice to have that as one of the holy objects that we work with by printing them. I think there is even a book of some of these sutras that Rinpoche likes, the Sangata Sutra or the Sutra of Golden Light, where you kind of go over the words. Yeah. And the other one I think is the Vajracutter Sutra, because that one is a bit shorter. But any of those kinds of things, they say are really meritorious by just writing the letters out. Making statues, paintings, drawings. Again, it's good if you can gain some skill in doing these things through the proper instruction. I mean, a lot of people like to paint, but they do kind of suggest that we study with somebody who's learned all the proper proportions of how the Buddha's body is in terms of making it look very pleasing and what have you. But nonetheless, we should still have respect for any type of painting or drawing of a Buddha. Making pilgrimage to holy places is another thing in regard to holy objects. If you have the good fortune to ever do this. Has anybody ever done one of these pilgrimages to India? Yeah, David has, very important. And not just to go and be a tourist and take pictures, but to actually do pilgrimage, which means saying mantras and doing practices, prostrations, what have you, at these holy sites. And then circumambulating holy objects, stupas and what have you. Again, many of our centers do have stupas on the grounds that you can circumambulate. They say you do it in kind of a clockwise direction with the stupa always to your right. And there's a story about, I always find this one a little problematic, but I'll tell it anyway. The story of the fly on the dung. Has anybody heard this one before? So the story goes that there's this, that I guess through some insight that the Buddha had, or some holy being, through their clairvoyance, they saw that this one particular person who was human being in that life and had incredible fortune, that in his prior life he was a fly, that there was a lot of water that had, a pool of water that had developed around this stupa, and there was a cow patty, a piece of dung that was floating on the water, and the fly landed on it out of its attachment to that sort of thing. And the cow dung floated around the stupa while he was eating, and that created some merit that allowed him to have this incredible good fortune. I guess it shows there's hope for all of us. If there's hope for this poor little fly that was like out of attachment eating, cow poop. I don't know.
He did get lucky.
He did get lucky. And it's pointing to, again, the power of the object. When you think about it from the point of view of a lot of the other stuff we talked about, the fly didn't have, any kind of bodhicitta motivation. The fly didn't even know what it was doing. It was just like probably out of attachment, eating all this stuff. And so it shows that the stupa itself, because of what it represents, which again is the holy mind of the Buddhas, it has that kind of power. It's not, again, we wouldn't say it's inherent in it. It's a dependent relation. It's arising on the basis of what it represents and the beings agreeing that this is what it represents. In that way, it has power. I sometimes point to like magnets as an example of something that we can see has something embedded within it, the magnetism of a magnet that allows it to attract other things. That's something that we can't again point to or whatever, but it is something that we can see is a relative thing within that magnetic object. So these objects act in a bit like that. So they become very powerful objects to kind of induce collection of merit. So again, if the fly can make it, I guess we can all make it. The other things that I mentioned that are just kind of worth throwing in here that are in the kind of another sort of other category would be taking vows, certainly. But I'm not one of these people that say, you have to go out and take vows. Investigate. As I said, spend your time practicing with the vows, and then see if they work for you, and then take them when you're comfortable. But recognizing that there wouldn't be vows if we could do all these actions perfectly. You wouldn't need vows. The vows are there to help you to gain greater proficiency in these more virtuous ways of being. Making prostrations, although we frequently do that in conjunction with purification, they are also a way of accumulating merit. Rejoicing is one of the most important things, and something I can't teach tonight without throwing in. We're a little bit over 9 o'clock. I apologize. Rejoicing is simply the practice of, like we did in the beginning meditation, thinking about our own qualities or our own good deeds or anyone else's, ordinary beings, our gurus, whoever, and bringing joy to our hearts. They say this is actually one of the easiest ways to accumulate merit. Master Shantideva, paraphrasing a little bit, but he essentially says, in this world where there's not much happiness, we can always have happiness and joy by thinking of the good qualities of others, their good fortune. So, if we can't have it ourselves, if we don't have it ourselves, we can always rejoice in others. And there's that wonderful story that I'm going to abbreviate really quickly, where there was a beggar who was watching this king put on this amazing banquet for the Buddha. And at the end of the evening, somebody asked the Buddha to, dedicate the merit for the person who had actually accumulated the greatest merit, so that they would have great benefits from what happened that evening. And of course, the king is thinking, well, I accumulated the most merit. I had this incredible banquet for the Buddha. But this beggar who was outside, who couldn't participate, generated incredible merit by rejoicing in the king's doing this. And because the king had a bit of conceit to all of his motivation, it was the beggar who was the person who created the most merit. So any of our worldly activities, we can once more change into more virtuous actions by generating more positive thoughts with them. And of course, dedicating, and we're going to do dedication in just a moment, but dedicating is a really important practice with our merit. It's said to, make that merit more secure, to help it to ripen into this inexhaustible result. So that's an important thing to emphasize. So any questions? I hope it's been useful to hear some of this and talk about it. You know, we have this amazing opportunity in this life to create unbelievable merit. It's not the whole of our path, but it's a good part of it. You know, as Rinpoche was saying in that quote that I mentioned from The Light of the Path, you can't even get good meditative stabilization without merit. You can't get any of these results we're trying to achieve on the path without putting the gas in the tank, without doing that work. So I'm going to read just a real quick thing from Rinpoche before we dedicate. He says, "You should know that the more merit you have, the easier and quicker it is for you to achieve liberation and enlightenment, and for you to liberate countless suffering sentient beings who are relying on you, who have a connection with you. More merit means that your wishes for happiness are fulfilled effortlessly, not only in future lives, but even in this life. If you think of something you need, that wish is fulfilled that same year, or after some months, weeks, a few days, on the same day, or even after 1 hour. Sometimes you are surprised because of the power of your merit and how a good thing happens without any effort." So, it's not to say that there's no effort involved in creating merit, but it's relatively effortless. It just means that, as I said, you can just take what you experience in a day and offer it, make it more beneficial to others through bodhicitta motivation. So let's dedicate the merits from tonight, and let's think back over these last 2 hours that we've sat here and discussed this topic of merit, all the things that we've said, that we've heard, that we've thought of, all these amazing seeds that we've planted in our minds with bodhicitta motivation, with this wish to benefit others. May this bring forth that result. May we be able to achieve complete enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings and bring them to that state. And while we're dedicating, we also dedicate for the long lives, the good health of all spiritual guides, especially those in our own tradition that we individually might be relying upon, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, our other gurus. But as I said earlier, for other spiritual traditions and their teachers as well, those who are guiding others to live more compassionately, to be wiser in their actions, and so on. May all spiritual guides have good health and long lives. And then lastly, we can dedicate for anyone else that we're holding in our hearts right now, seeing that those are beings that we do have some karma with, whether they be individuals that we know who are experiencing obstacles or illness, who have died or are dying, or whether it just be people in this world whose situation moves us. May these beings achieve cessation of their suffering through our efforts here tonight. May they all find true happiness. May all beings find peace and happiness through our efforts here tonight. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Enjoyed this very much.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful topic to talk about.